Joan Crawford, welcome to Washington.
Thank you very much. It's lovely to be here, and I'm looking forward to tonight very much.
What are you going to do a little later tonight?
Well, they have clips from 5 of my films, and we discuss, after each clip, then Richard Coe interviews me, and we discuss things that might have happened during the filming of them, if I can remember some of them.
Richard Coe being, of course, an outstanding critic here in Washington.
He sure is.
You haven't mentioned this, but I'd like to. The American Film Institute told me earlier that you have donated 9 of your films that you owned the rights to, that you gave them these films.
Yes, I did. You see, unfortunately, we never could buy any of our films at Metro. So I bought films from Columbia and Warner Brothers. So I gave them all I had.
Now, for the next several days, the American Film Institute is having a tribute to Joan Crawford, and they're going to show several of your films.
Well, unfortunately, Dancing Lady will not appear tonight because it's not going to be here in time. Where it's being shipped from, I don't know, but instead they're using a Hollywood Review and Possessed, Woman's Face, Johnny Guitar, I've forgotten.
And Sudden Fear?
Sudden Fear, yes, thank you.
I know because I've received the brochure from being a member, of course, at the American Film Institute.
Your mouth opened when I told you that Dancing Lady wasn't going to be shown tonight. You went, ah.
I remember an especially tremendous vitality in that film that you had, that Clark Gable had.
Yes, we worked very well together.
Now, I know you've been asked this question time and again, but which of your films, you've done some 80-odd films, which 3 or 4 would you say that you have liked, that you liked the best?
Naturally, Mildred Pierce, because I was lucky enough to win the award, but the first Possessed was with Gable. I adored that film. And the second Possessed at Warner Brothers was done with Ray Massey and Van Heflin. I think that's one of my best performances. I was nominated for that. And I loved doing Humoresque with Johnny Garfield. I adored that. And I loved A Gorgeous Hussy with Jimmy Stewart and Lionel Barrymore and Robert Taylor, and beautiful cast. It goes on and on and on.
Did you have fun doing some of them? All of them?
I had fun doing all of them. I just loved movies. I'm stage struck.
Did you yourself go to the movies a great deal?
Oh,
as
I
we
showed
did?
2 every Saturday night and 2 every Sunday night in my home.
The film you made most recently is Trog. It hasn't opened in Washington as yet, and so I haven't had an opportunity to see it. Would you tell us a little bit about it?
Well, you know, the picture itself got mediocre reviews, and it was double billed with a big horror picture, Dracula Strikes Back or Dracula's Blood or something. And unfortunately, everyone thought Trog was a horror film. It was my first science fiction, and I took it because I'd never done a science fiction story before, and I loved doing it. And I was just sick about the reviews and the way it was just kind of shuffled off, but I'm still glad I made it. It was fun, it was an experience, and I learned a great deal.
You did that picture in Britain, I believe.
Yes, it was my third.
In Britain? Mm-hmm. Do you like doing films overseas when the locale calls for it?
Yes, the hours were just horrendous on Trog because contractually, when they sign you for a location picture, they can work you. You get up at 3:45 in the morning, they can work you until the light goes, which is 8 o'clock at night. And then you have a 2-hour drive home, and it's a pretty long day. But the regular pictures done in the studios over there are a delight. The lights go out at 5:30 every afternoon, and you go home at a decent hour.
Then I take it perhaps that though we hear a great deal about runaway productions and the harm they are doing to Hollywood, when there's a reason for films being done overseas, when it calls for location shooting, you think that that is a good thing?
Well, I'm very much against the runaway films, really, because I think Hollywood needs every bit of help from every person who's ever thought of being in it or wants to be in it or has been in it. And the industry needs all the help it can get. I know that a great many of the male stars have done nothing but overseas pictures for years because it's cheaper. And of course, on the budget pictures, such as $500,000, on the EDI plan, I'm sure you know what that is.
Yes.
The government puts up half the money.
Yes.
And that's the way you can do a low-budget picture. And you can't do that in the States. There's nobody that puts up half the money. But that's why they do it. But I am very much in sympathy with the people in Hollywood who resent the runaway productions. I do too, as a matter of fact.
The old studio system that they had in Hollywood, how do you feel about that? When they had young actors, actresses, and they were being trained in dancing, diction, do you think that that was a very good thing for them, or being under contract to one studio for some time, do you think in another way to offset the good features?
Well, I never took any dancing lessons nor voice lessons. I know they
need them.
had. No, I did. I paid for my own singing lessons. Never had time for the dancing lessons, but they did have coaches there, and they had a wonderful lady there called Gertrude Fogler, who helped me, and I know that Hepburn went to her constantly, Katharine Hepburn, to read poetry.
I read somewhere that George Cukor had been really helpful when you did the film, The Women, as a director. Is that right?
He's helpful to all of us. He was, and there were quite a lot of women in that show.
There certainly were.
But he was extremely helpful to me in Woman's Face, because it was a very difficult role, and I had begun to do a little more comedy and everything, and then went into the drama of that. And he was just great. He's always been great to me, and incidentally, he's one of my dearest and closest friends.
There are so many ingredients that go into the making of a good film, that go into the making of any film. The story, the casting, the director. Which of these do you think are most important, or are all equally
You couldn't
important?
make a loaf of bread without all the ingredients, could you? They're all equally important. No one man has ever done anything alone.
Not in films, certainly.
No.
One of your films, Miss Crawford, didn't receive, well, it received pretty bad reviews, I'm afraid, at the time that it came out. And I understand that you yourself didn't like it very much. It was called Rain, the Sadie Thompson.
It isn't that I disliked it. The director and I didn't get along, and that's one of the few incidents in my 86 pictures and all the films I've made that I didn't get along with the director. And, but let's say he was a man's director, and I felt he kind of bypassed me, and I needed all the help I could get. And I was disappointed in him, and I got very bad reviews. It said, the one I kept on my mirror for so long was Joan Crawford gives a high school girl's performance of Sadie Thompson. And every time I got uppity and my ego got a little bit too strong, I would just read it. It took me down.
Well, the reason I mentioned that, Miss Crawford, I don't know if you've come across this book, Stardom, by a very fine British film critic, Alexander Walker. I don't know if anyone called it to your attention or not, but he has some very fine things to say about...
Why don't you read it, please?
Says Mr. Walker, in retrospect, one wonders how the film, and he's talking about Rain, one wonders how the film and the star could have been so undervalued. Both must have been ahead of their time. Next to Mildred Pierce, Sadie Thompson is Crawford's strongest, most successful performance. I thought you might like to know that Mr. Walker thinks it's one of your best performances.
He's a very nice man.
You worked for a long time with MGM.
17 years.
17 years. Mm-hmm. And then you were with Warner's, I believe, or was it Columbia?
Warner's, and then
Warner's.
loaned out to Columbia.
Mm-hmm. What do you think of the current trend whereby an actor will do one film for one studio, and then he'll look for the property which he thinks is best for him, and he'll go to another studio? Do you think that is good for the industry?
Sure, because sometimes the studio keeps you in a rut and lets you just keep on playing the same part all the time. I think it's great.
And what do you think of the fact that we have so many independent film producers? Do you think that's good for the industry and for moviegoers?
I do. I think Mr. Aaron Spelling is one of the greatest independent producers I've ever seen. He's doing the greatest 2-hour movies on television, made especially for television. I'm sure they'll be shown theatrically throughout the world eventually. But I just saw last week, he does Mod Squad also, and I saw that, and following it was Congratulations, It's a Boy, with Bill Bixby, and it was sensational.
I
Very
saw
good.
it, yes.
Yeah, did you see it?
Yes.
It's just lovely.
It was lovely. It's nice to hear that you like television, that you find things in it that you can find moving too. I found it very.
They haven't started
very
putting
moving.
nudity on television yet. Maybe that's why I enjoy it.
Well, I was going to ask you how you feel about nudity. I know things were very suggestive in the 30s and 40s, very glamorous and seductive without all that nudity.
We didn't need it. I don't think we need it now. I've talked to a great many of the kids today, the teenagers and younger, and they seem to think they've had it.
You think this trend may be just about
over
and done with? I came across an item the other day. I was in New York. Apparently they were showing Dancing Lady, and you were sitting in the back very quietly watching it with the audience. The theater manager had recognized you, of course, and when it was over, he announced to the audience that you were in the back. Not true? Not true?
I went in as the picture was still going on, and my last dance number with Fred Astaire, sneaked in and sat right down. One young man stood up and gave me his seat on the aisle. Nobody announced me, and a buzz went through that audience like you've never seen and heard in your life, and suddenly they all stood up as one body, still with the picture going on, and I didn't know whether to say thank you for me or cut the picture off or do what, but I was so grateful. And they started to applaud and yell, brava, 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 and there wasn't a person in that room over 23 and a half, and then the house lights went on. I walked down the aisle with tears streaming down my face. I was just completely unashamed. I was so touched.
Well, then let me ask you, is this part of the story correct then, that you...
The fan letter was written in the Times.
And that you picked up your skirt just a little and showed your legs, which were as trim and shapely as ever?
I did that outside the theater when I put my hands in the cement and showed them my hot pants and my legs. Not in the theater. I was too emotional in there.
Does something like this make you nostalgic for the past?
Not at all. I never live in the past. I never think about yesterday. That's over.
Then even if you could resurrect the old Hollywood, you would not be inclined to do so?
No. We've had that. Let's get a new one.
You must be getting quite a number of scripts to read. Have you found one that you like, that you would like to do next?
I get a lot of them, but oh my goodness, I can't tell you how bad they are. Really.
I'm sorry to hear that. I was looking forward to another Joan Crawford film.
Me too. You don't know how I want to do one.
And is your work as director of Pepsi-Cola, is that stimulating to you at this point, too?
Oh, very much. Go through all over the world, many thousands of hundreds of thousands of miles a year. And this past year I did Sao Paulo, Puerto Rico, Denmark. Where else did I go? Paris. That's just overseas, but then domestically I travel constantly. I live in the air more than I live
and
in my own
you didn't like to
apartment.
fly at one time, I believe.
I'd better like it now, because that's where I live most of my life.
I understand you go to some very remote parts of the world, and the reason I ask you that, are you known, for instance, when you go to these remote parts of the world, do people recognize you from your films?
That's the great power of motion pictures. And people who take it upon themselves and their egos to think it's just them, they're crazy. They're out of their minds. It's the power of motion pictures that has put us in that position. We had nothing to do with it. Pictures are shown all over the world. There's no language barrier. It's just beautiful to behold. I got off the plane once in Lorenzo Marx without any makeup on because it was so hot. And I thought, well, nobody will know me anyway, 7 o'clock in the morning, there were 20,000 people there waiting.
Well, then you verified, once again, something that I've heard from people who travel much more than I do, that films, that's the international language.
Oh, it sure is.
the international medium.
It's fantastic.
I know how very busy you are, but I must ask you just one personal question. How are your 4 children?
They're fine, thank you. Just great.
Thank you very much for talking with us today, Joan Crawford.
Thank you, and God bless you.
I've been talking with actress, mother, author, businesswoman, Joan Crawford. This is Ruth Kosanogi, Voice of America, Washington.